The mountains of Arizona Territory don't forgive mistakes. In February of 1876, as the nation celebrated its centennial year, those jagged peaks of the Mogollon Rim stood 7,000 feet above a world that was tearing itself apart. White settlers pushed west. Apache tribes fought to hold what had been theirs for centuries. And caught between these two colliding forces were the innocent, the forgotten, the ones nobody claimed. This is the story of how one man found redemption in the last place he expected. In the cry of two babies who should have been dead. In the fierce heart of an Apache woman who taught him that broken things could still have purpose. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me take you back to that February morning when the wind carried the smell of snow and pine, and Caleb McAllister thought he was alone in the world. He preferred it that way. Caleb Bear Mackenzie stood 6 feet 4 inches in his moccasins, a mountain of a man who moved through the forest like smoke. His beard, thick and black, covered half his face. His hair hung past his shoulders, uncut for 5 years. He wore a grizzly bear coat that made him look more animal than human, which suited him fine. Animals didn't ask questions about your past. They didn't want to know why you'd run to the high country and never come back down. The scars told their own story. The long white line down his left cheek from a knife fight he barely remembered. The missing index finger on his right hand, lost to a trap that closed too fast. The deeper scars, the ones nobody could see, those were the ones that had driven him up here in the first place. He was checking his trap line that morning, walking a circuit he'd walked 1,000 times. The snow was deep, up past his knees in places, but he knew every rock, every fallen log, every place where the ice might give way beneath your weight. This was his territory now, his kingdom of silence. The steel trap lay buried under 6 inches of fresh powder. He knelt beside it, noting the tracks. A pine marten had approached, circled, moved on. Smart creature. The trap would be empty again today, like most days in deep winter, when the animals grew cautious and food grew scarce. He was resetting the trap when he heard it. At first, he thought it was the wind. The Mogollon Rim was famous for its winds, howling through the ponderosa pines like the voices of the dead. But this sound was different, higher pitched, more human. It sounded like a baby crying. Caleb went very still. His hand moved to the hunting knife at his belt, pure instinct. In 5 years on this mountain, he'd never heard a sound like that. There were no settlements within 50 miles, no wagon roads, no reason for anyone to be up here with an infant in the dead of winter. He must be hearing things. Loneliness could do that to a man, make him hear voices in the wind, see faces in the fire. The sound came again, weaker this time, but unmistakable. A baby's cry. Caleb rose to his full height, scanning the tree line. Nothing moved except the branches swaying in the wind. Then he looked downslope, toward the canyon that cut through the mountain like a wound. And he saw it. 200 yards below his position, something dark against the white snow. Not a rock, too angular. Man-made. He started moving before he'd made a conscious decision, his long legs carrying him down the slope in powerful strides. The snow tried to slow him, but he'd spent 5 years learning how to move in this terrain. He used the trees for handholds, cutting a diagonal path that brought him to the dark shape in less than 5 minutes. It was a travois, an Apache carrying frame, the kind they used to transport belongings, and sometimes they're injured. It had overturned, probably when the horse pulling it had panicked and bolted. The animal lay dead 20 feet away, its neck broken, already half buried in snow. But it was what lay beneath the travois that stopped Caleb's heart. A woman, Apache by her clothing. She lay on her side, one arm stretched out, frozen in death. Her face was turned away, but Caleb could see she'd been young, 25 maybe, no more than 30. And clutched in her outstretched arm, protected by her body from the worst of the cold, were 2 cradle boards, traditional Apache baby carriers made of willow and hide, with protective canopies that shielded the occupants from wind and weather. Inside those cradle boards, incredibly, impossibly, were 2 babies, still breathing. Caleb dropped to his knees in the snow, his hands shaking as he reached for the first cradle board. A boy, maybe 6 months old. His face had a bluish tinge from the cold, but his chest rose and fell in shallow breaths. On his left temple, clearly visible even in the infant's distress, was a birthmark shaped like an eagle's talon. The second cradle board held a girl, same age, same features, twins. Her breathing was slightly stronger than her brother's, which made sense because the mother's body had shielded her more directly from the wind. But what caught Caleb's attention, what made him catch his breath, was her eyes. One brown, like you'd expect in an Apache baby. One green, the color of spring grass, of new leaves, of hope. He'd seen eyes like that before. Irish blood, probably. Mixed heritage. These weren't full-blood Apache babies. Their father had been white, which meant they were caught between 2 worlds before they'd even learned to crawl. Caleb's hands moved without conscious thought, guided by instincts he thought he'd buried with his own son. He checked for injuries. None visible. He pressed his fingers to the babies' necks, feeling for pulses. Weak, but steady. Hypothermia, 2nd stage. They were maybe 2 hours from death, maybe less. He needed to get them warm, now. He pulled off his bearskin coat, wrapping both cradle boards together in the massive fur. Then he lifted them, surprised at how light they were, how fragile. He placed them carefully in his leather pack, positioning them so their faces were clear, but their bodies were protected. Only then did he look back at the dead woman. She deserved burial. She deserved to be carried back to her people with honor. But if he took the time for that, the babies would die. He had maybe 3 miles to cover to reach his cabin, and the temperature was dropping as the sun climbed higher. Counterintuitive, but true. Clear skies in winter meant brutal cold. He made the choice quickly, the way you had to make choices in the mountains. He would come back for her. He would do right by her. But first, he would save her children. That was what she would have wanted. He could tell by the way she'd positioned her body, even in death, to shelter them from the worst of the wind. The journey back to his cabin took 45 minutes. 45 minutes of brutal physical effort, climbing upslope through deep snow while carrying extra weight. 45 minutes of listening to the babies whimper and cry, weak sounds that reminded him of things he'd tried to forget. His son Jacob had made sounds like that once, when the fever first took him. Small whimpers that said, "I hurt. I'm scared. Help me." Caleb had been powerless then. He'd held his boy's burning body and watched life drain away like water through his fingers. He wouldn't be powerless now. His cabin appeared through the trees like salvation. Stone walls, 2 feet thick, built to withstand the mountain's worst moods. A heavy wooden door barred from inside. Smoke rising from the chimney because he always kept the forge burning, always kept the cabin warm enough to work leather and metal. He kicked the door open, not bothering with the latch, and stumbled inside. The heat hit him like a wall. After the bitter cold outside, the cabin felt like an oven. Perfect. He set the pack down near the forge, in the warmest part of the cabin and carefully extracted the cradle boards. Both babies were still breathing, but their skin was cold to the touch, their lips still tinged with blue. Caleb's hands, so skilled at working metal and setting traps, turned clumsy when faced with the ties that held the babies in their carriers. He fumbled with the leather straps, cursing his missing finger, until finally he freed the boy. Then the girl. He knew what to do next. The army had taught him field medicine, and he'd learned more from necessity over the years. Hypothermia treatment was straightforward. Gradual warming. No sudden temperature changes that could shock the system. He pulled his shirt off and held the babies against his bare chest, one on each side, wrapping a blanket around all three of them. Skin-to-skin contact, the fastest way to transfer heat. The babies felt like ice against his skin, but he gritted his teeth and held them close. "Come on," he heard himself whisper. "Come on, little ones. Stay with me." The boy stirred first, a small movement, then a stronger one. His eyes opened, dark and unfocused. He looked up at Caleb's bearded face, and his mouth opened in what might have been surprise, or might have been the beginning of a cry. "Shh," Caleb said. "You're safe now. I got you." The girl took longer. Her breathing stayed shallow for what felt like an eternity, and Caleb felt something close to panic building in his chest. "Not this one, too. Please, not this one." Then her eyes opened, one brown, one green, looking up at him with an intensity that seemed impossible in something so small. And she smiled. Just a flicker, maybe just gas, the way babies do. But Caleb chose to believe it was more than that. Chose to believe this tiny scrap of humanity was thanking him for pulling her back from the edge. He held them like that for an hour, until their skin warmed and their breathing steadied, and they started to fuss in that particular way that means hungry, not dying. Only then did he face his next problem. He knew how to hunt and trap and work metal. He knew how to survive alone in country that killed weaker men. But feeding babies? That was territory he hadn't crossed in 5 years, not since Jacob. He had goats, 2 of them, kept for milk because coffee wasn't worth drinking without it. He'd milked them that morning before checking his traps, and the fresh milk sat in a clay jar near the door where the cold kept it from spoiling. He grabbed the jar and a clean cloth. Babies drank milk, that much he remembered. But how? They were too young for cups, too young to drink from their hands. He soaked the cloth in milk and held it to the boy's mouth. The baby latched on instinctively, sucking the milk from the fabric. It worked. Thank God, it worked. He repeated the process with the girl, who proved more aggressive than her brother. She sucked so hard she drained the cloth in seconds, then cried for more. Strong lungs on this one. She was a fighter. It took him the better part of an hour to feed them both. His back ached from hunching over. His arms cramped from holding their small bodies at the right angle. But when they finally fell asleep, milk, drunk and warm, he felt something he hadn't felt in 5 years. Purpose. He laid them carefully in a wooden crate lined with fur, the best cradle he could improvise on short notice. They curled together naturally, the way they must have in the womb, the girl's hand resting on her brother's chest. Only then did Caleb let himself look at the corner of the cabin he usually avoided. The small altar he'd built from river stones. The daguerreotype photograph, faded but still visible. Emma, his wife, holding baby Jacob in her arms. Both of them smiling at something outside the frame. Both of them dead 4 months after that photograph was taken. Diphtheria, a disease with a name that sounded like poetry, and killed like war. First Jacob, his small body convulsing with fever, while Caleb held him and begged God for mercy. Then Emma, 3 days later, her last words a whisper, "Take care of our boy." But their boy was already gone, and Caleb had buried them both on a hillside in Kentucky before running west, running to the mountains, running from memory. Except you can't outrun memory. It follows you. It waits for you in the quiet moments, in the space between heartbeats. He looked at the photograph, looked at the sleeping babies, back to the photograph. "I failed you," he whispered to the image of his dead wife. "I couldn't save either of you, but maybe I can save these two." Night fell hard in the high country. Caleb built up the fire, checked on the babies every few minutes, and tried not to think about what came next, because there would be a next. There always was. These babies had a family somewhere, Apache people who would be searching for them, grieving for them. The dead woman had been traveling for a reason, heading somewhere specific. Someone would notice she hadn't arrived. He couldn't keep them, he knew that. But he could keep them alive until he found their people. That much he could do. He was sitting by the forge, starting to carve small wooden rattles from scraps of pine, when he heard the horses. Multiple horses, moving fast. Caleb grabbed his rifle and moved to the window, keeping low. Through the gaps in the shutters, he could see them emerging from the tree line. Apache warriors, maybe a dozen of them, riding in formation. War party, by the look of them. Armed with rifles and bows, faces painted for battle. Leading them was a woman. She rode at the front like she had every right to be there, like she'd earned that position through blood and skill. She wore a mixture of traditional Apache dress and practical cavalry pants, clothes designed for movement and survival. Her hair, long and black, hung in a thick braid down her back. Even from a distance, Caleb could see the scar that ran across her right shoulder, visible where her shirt didn't quite cover it. She was beautiful in the way a knife was beautiful, sharp and dangerous, and absolutely unafraid. The war party stopped 30 yards from his cabin. The woman dismounted in one fluid movement and walked forward, her hand resting on the knife at her belt, but not drawing it. A gesture of caution, not aggression. Caleb made a decision. He set the rifle aside, opened the door, and stepped outside with his hands visible and empty. They faced each other across 30 feet of snow. The woman's eyes were hard, assessing. Warrior's eyes. She'd killed before. She'd kill again if she had to. When she spoke, her English was perfect. Mission school educated, Caleb guessed. Forced education, the kind the government loved to inflict on Indian children to civilize them. "Mountain man," she said, "I am looking for a travois. Overturned. A woman, 2 babies. Have you seen them?" Caleb's mind raced through his options. He could lie, probably should lie. Apache woman traveling with warriors could mean anything. Could mean these were the very people who'd attacked the baby's mother. Could mean danger for the children. But he looked at her face and saw something that made him take the risk. He saw grief. Real, raw, barely contained. "Yes," he said. "I found them. The woman is dead. The babies are alive, inside." The woman's face, so carefully controlled, cracked, just for a second. Just enough for Caleb to see the pain beneath the warrior mask. "Liluye," she whispered. "My sister." Then she was moving, not toward him, but toward the cabin, and Caleb had to step quickly to block her path. "Wait," he said. "Your warriors stay outside. You can come in, but only you." She stopped, tension vibrating through her like a drawn bowstring. "Those babies are my blood, my family. And I just spent all day keeping them alive," Caleb said quietly. "So we're going to do this careful. We're going to do it smart, for their sake." Something shifted in her eyes. Calculation. Respect, maybe. She turned and spoke rapid Apache to her warriors. They nodded, dismounting but staying back. She followed Caleb inside. The cabin was warm, filled with the smell of wood smoke and leather and fresh milk. The woman's eyes went immediately to the crate where the babies slept. She crossed the distance in 3 long strides and dropped to her knees beside them. Her hand, calloused from bow and knife work, reached out with infinite gentleness to touch the girl's face. The baby stirred, opening her mismatched eyes, and the woman caught her breath. "Morning, dove," she whispered. Then, touching the boy, "Little eagle." "You know them," Caleb said, not a question. "I named them." Her voice was thick with emotion she wasn't quite managing to hide. "6 months ago, when my sister gave birth, I held them first, before anyone else. I was supposed to protect them." "What happened?" She looked up at him then, and Caleb saw the full weight of what she carried. Pain, guilt, rage. "My brother happened," she said. "My brother, who could not accept that our sister married a white man, who saw these babies as pollution, as shame to our family. He found them on the trail. He killed Liluye. He tried to kill these 2. Their father? Missing, presumed dead. He was Army, deserter now. There is a price on his head." Before Caleb could respond, before he could process this new information, a warrior outside shouted a warning in Apache. The woman spun toward the window. Caleb joined her. Through the gaps in the shutters, they could see more riders approaching. But these weren't Apache. United States Cavalry. 20 soldiers in blue uniforms, riding in tight formation. Leading them was an officer with silver hair and the kind of rigid posture that spoke of decades in service. "Carrington," the woman hissed. "The colonel from Fort Apache. What does he want?" "The same thing my brother wants. To take these babies. To use them as weapons in a war they didn't choose." Caleb looked at the sleeping twins, looked at the fierce woman beside him, looked at the cavalry approaching, and the Apache warriors waiting outside. He thought about running, about hiding, about all the ways this could go wrong. Then he thought about 5 years ago, watching his son die because Caleb hadn't been strong enough, hadn't been smart enough, hadn't been there. He wouldn't run this time. "Then we fight," he said. The woman looked at him, surprise flickering across her face. "You would stand with me? Against your own people?" "They stopped being my people a long time ago," Caleb said. "And those babies don't belong to any people. They belong to themselves." Outside, the cavalry was closing in. Colonel Carrington's voice rang out, cold and official. "McAllister, we know you're harboring a fugitive Apache woman and stolen Indian children. Surrender them immediately." The woman moved to the crate, gathering the babies into her arms. They woke, starting to fuss. She whispered something to them in Apache, a lullaby maybe, and they calmed. "What's your name?" Caleb asked. "Nalnish," she said. "In your language, Catherine, Thunderwalker's daughter." "Well, Catherine," Caleb said, checking the load in his rifle, "I hope you're as good a fighter as you look." She smiled then, not a warm smile, a wolf's smile, all teeth and no mercy. "Better," she said. And as the cavalry dismounted outside, as Colonel Carrington's soldiers surrounded the cabin, as the 2 worlds that had been at war for centuries prepared to collide again, 2 babies slept peacefully in the arms of an Apache warrior woman, while a mountain man, who'd forgotten how to care about anything, remembered why some things were worth fighting for. The mountains don't forgive, but sometimes they give you a chance at redemption. Sometimes they give you a chance to save the things you couldn't save before. Sometimes, in the cry of two babies who should have been dead, you find a reason to live again. The cabin felt smaller, with tension filling every corner. Caleb stood at the window, rifle ready, watching Colonel Carrington's cavalry spread out in a practiced formation. 20 men, 20 rifles, professional soldiers who knew their business. Catherine had moved to the back of the cabin, the twins cradled in her arms, her body positioned between them and the door. Her warriors waited outside, caught between two armed forces. The mathematics of the situation were simple and brutal. If shooting started, people would die. Maybe everyone. Caleb had seen enough death to know how it started. A nervous finger on a trigger. A sudden movement misread as aggression. The first shot fired in fear, and then the flood that followed, unstoppable as an avalanche. He wouldn't let it happen here, not with babies in the room. Colonel Marcus Carrington dismounted with the stiff precision of a man whose spine had forgotten how to bend. He was maybe 46, silver threading through his dark hair, his uniform immaculate, despite the long ride. His face had the weathered look of decades in harsh country, but his eyes were what told the real story. Hard eyes. Eyes that had seen things and made difficult choices and learned to sleep afterward. "McAllister!" His voice carried the authority of a man accustomed to obedience. "I know you're in there. You're interfering with a federal investigation. Open this door." Caleb glanced back at Catherine. She met his eyes and gave the smallest shake of her head. "Don't trust him." Fair enough. Caleb didn't trust anyone much these days. He moved to the door but didn't open it, spoke through the thick wood instead. "Colonel, I don't know what investigation you're talking about. I'm just a trapper trying to mind my own business." "Don't play games with me." Carrington's patience was already wearing thin. "We tracked an Apache war party to this location. We have reports of stolen Indian children. Hand over the fugitive woman and the babies, now." Stolen. The word hung in the air like gunsmoke, as if babies could be stolen from the people trying to protect them. Caleb felt anger kindle in his chest, an old familiar heat he'd tried to bury along with everything else. "Colonel, the only thing I've got in here is 2 babies I pulled out of the snow this morning. They were freezing to death. I saved them. That's not a federal crime, last I checked. Those children are material witnesses in an ongoing desertion case," Carrington was shouting now. "Their father is Captain James Thornton, wanted for murder of a superior officer. The children fall under military jurisdiction." Behind Caleb, Catherine's voice came low and dangerous. "They're using babies as evidence, as weapons. This is who you're dealing with, mountain man." Caleb made a decision. He opened the door, but only a crack, just enough to show his face, to let Carrington see he wasn't hiding. "Colonel, those babies are 6 months old. They're not witnesses to anything except being born. Their mother is dead, frozen on the mountain. I found them just in time. Now their aunt has come to claim them. Family business, not federal." Carrington's face darkened. The woman in there is not their legal guardian. She's a fugitive Apache, harboring illegitimate, mixed-blood offspring of a deserter. By law, those children belong in federal custody, pending resolution of their father's case. The words were carefully chosen. Legal. Proper. The kind of language that turned human beings into property and made atrocity sound like paperwork. Caleb had heard language like that before. In 1864, when Colonel Chivington had explained why massacring peaceful Cheyenne at Sand Creek was necessary for the safety of white settlers. Necessary, legal, proper. He'd been there. He'd led the soldiers to that camp. And when the shooting started, when women and children started dying, he'd tried to stop it and taken a rifle butt to the head for his trouble. Some things you don't forget. Some stains don't wash off. The law, Caleb said quietly, doesn't always mean justice. Carrington's hand moved toward his sidearm. That's dangerously close to sedition, McAllister. Open this door. That's an order. You're not my commanding officer anymore, Colonel. I'm a civilian. This is private property, and unless you've got a warrant signed by a federal judge, you're trespassing. For a long moment, the only sound was wind through the pines. Then Catherine stepped forward, moving beside Caleb in the doorway. The twins were secure in a sling across her chest, their small faces just visible above the fabric. When she spoke, her voice carried the crisp diction of someone who'd been educated against her will, but learned to use every weapon available. Colonel Carrington, my name is Nalnish. In English, Catherine, daughter of Chief Dasoda of the White Mountain Apache. Under the Treaty of 1855, Article 7, children of mixed Apache and white parentage have the right to choose their tribal affiliation upon reaching the age of understanding. Until that time, they remain under the guardianship of their blood relatives. That would be me, their mother's sister. Carrington's eyes narrowed. He hadn't expected articulate legal argument from an Apache woman. Most white men didn't. That treaty was superseded by the Indian Appropriations Act of 1871, he said. All Indians are now wards of the federal government. The children fall under federal jurisdiction. The Appropriations Act was never ratified by Apache leadership, Catherine countered. It violates the terms of the original treaty. If you seize these children by force, you create an international incident. Treaty violations can be appealed to Washington, even to foreign governments who monitor American treatment of indigenous peoples. Caleb looked at her with new respect. She wasn't just a warrior. She was a strategist, and she'd just put Carrington in a corner. The colonel's jaw tightened. This is semantics, legal tricks. No, Catherine said. This is law. The same law you claim to uphold. Or does it only apply when convenient for the United States Army? A flush crept up Carrington's neck. Anger, yes, but also something else. Uncertainty. Because she was right, and he knew it. A treaty violation, especially one witnessed by Apache warriors who could testify to it, would bring scrutiny he didn't want. This isn't over, Carrington said. I'll return with proper documentation, federal warrants, and when I do, your legal arguments won't matter. Then we'll see you when you have those warrants, Caleb said. Until then, you're on my land without permission. I'd appreciate it if you'd leave. Carrington stared at him for a long moment, then at Catherine, then at the babies, just visible in their sling. Something flickered across his face, something that might have been pain, but it was gone too quickly to be sure. "Mount up," he barked to his men. "We're returning to Fort Apache." The cavalry withdrew with military precision, leaving deep tracks in the snow. But Caleb noticed that Carrington looked back twice before disappearing into the trees. A man with doubts, maybe, or just a man calculating his next move. When the sound of hoofbeats faded, Catherine's warriors emerged from their positions in the rocks. They'd been ready to fight, Caleb realized, ready to die if it came to that, for these babies, for their chief's daughter. The tension in the cabin released like a bowstring cut. Catherine sagged against the wall, the warrior mask slipping to show the exhaustion beneath. "He'll come back," she said. "With papers, with more men. We bought time, nothing more." "How much time?" 2 days, maybe 3. Fort Apache is 40 miles south. He'll need to send telegrams, get authorization from the territorial office. But he'll get it. Men like Carrington always do. Caleb moved to the stove, started heating water for coffee. His hands were steady, but his mind was racing. "Then we use the time we've got. We can't stay here. He knows this location now. We need to move." "To where?" Catherine looked at him with those warrior's eyes, assessing. "Every fort in the territory will be watching for us. Every settlement. Where can we go that the army won't find us?" Caleb poured 2 cups of coffee, handed her one. Their fingers touched briefly. Her hands were as calloused as his, marked by hard work and harder choices. "Mescalero Apache Reservation," he said, "in New Mexico. Different tribe. Neutral ground. There's a medicine man there, Grandfather Chayton. Known him 10 years. Fair man, wise man. He might grant sanctuary." Catherine sipped the coffee, thinking. Mescalero. That's 250 miles east. Through Army patrol zones. Through my brother's hunting territory. With 2 babies. "You got a better idea?" She almost smiled. "No, which is why I'm considering your impossible plan. But we'll need help. Papers, supplies, and we'll need to move fast. I've got a contact at Fort Apache, old Army friend, Sergeant Daniel O'Brien. Irish, decent man, owes me a life debt from the war. He can forge travel documents." "You trust him?" Caleb thought about Danny O'Brien, about Shiloh, 1862, when a Confederate bayonet had been seconds from Danny's throat, and Caleb had put a bullet through the rebel's skull. About the dozen times since when their paths had crossed, and Danny had looked at him with gratitude and guilt mixed together. "As much as I trust anyone," Caleb said, "which isn't much. But we don't have many options." Catherine nodded slowly. "Then we travel together. As allies." "As allies," Caleb agreed. They shook hands. Her grip was firm, a warrior's handshake that meant something, meant commitment, meant she'd stand beside you when it mattered. The next 3 days passed in a blur of preparation. Catherine's warriors helped gather supplies while staying out of sight from any passing patrols. Caleb worked his forge, making horseshoes, mending tack, creating the things they'd need for a long journey in hard country. And in the quiet moments, the ones between action and planning, Caleb and Catherine learned about each other. It happened in small ways. Her showing him how to properly secure the babies in their cradle boards for travel. Him teaching her the best way to clean and maintain a rifle in dusty conditions. Her explaining which desert plants were edible, which ones poisonous. Him demonstrating how to set a trap that wouldn't injure an animal unnecessarily. Knowledge traded back and forth. Respect building in the space between words. On the second evening, after the babies were asleep and the warriors were posted as sentries, Catherine and Caleb sat by the fire. The flames cast dancing shadows on the stone walls. Outside, wind howled through the pines like voices of the dead. "Tell me about them," Catherine said. "Your family, the ones in that photograph." Caleb's first instinct was to shut down, to change the subject. He'd spent 5 years not talking about Emma and Jacob, not thinking about them if he could help it. Memory was a knife that twisted. But Catherine's eyes held no judgment, only understanding. She'd lost people too. He could see it in the way she held the twins, like she was afraid they might disappear if she let go. Emma, he said quietly. My wife. She was a farmer's daughter from Kentucky, smart as a whip, could read Latin, if you can believe it. Her father had been a teacher before taking up farming. She inherited his books, his love of learning. He stared into the fire, seeing her face in the flames. Dark hair, bright eyes, a smile that could light up a room. We met at a barn raising. I was 22, just back from the war. Broken, in ways I didn't understand yet. She saw something in me worth saving, married me despite her father's objections, said I had good hands, meant for building, not destroying. She was right, Catherine said softly. Maybe, for a while. We had 3 good years, built a cabin together, started a small blacksmith shop. Then Jacob came along, and I thought, this is it. This is what I was meant for. Not soldiering, not killing. This. The memory was sharp enough to draw blood. Jacob's first steps, his first words. The way he'd grab Caleb's beard and laugh like it was the funniest thing in the world. Diphtheria came in the winter of 1871. Started with a sore throat. By the next day, Jacob couldn't breathe right. By the 3rd day, he was burning up with fever. I rode 20 miles for a doctor. By the time we got back, Jacob was gone. Just gone, like a candle blown out. Catherine's hand found his in the darkness, squeezed once, said nothing, because what was there to say? Emma lasted 3 more days, caught it from nursing him. Her last words were, "Take care of our boy." But our boy was already dead. I'd already failed. The fire crackled. Wind moaned. The babies slept peacefully, unaware of the grief that filled the cabin like smoke. I buried them on a hillside behind our cabin, Caleb continued. Side by side. Then I burned everything. The cabin, the shop, all of it. Took what I could carry and came west. Figured if I went far enough, high enough, maybe the memories wouldn't follow. Did it work? Catherine asked. No. They followed me up here, waited for me in the quiet moments. But after a while, I got used to them. The memories weren't good company, but they were the only company I had. Catherine was silent for a long time. Then she told him her story about her sister Liluye, gentle soul, born into a warrior family. About how Liluye had fallen in love with Lieutenant James Thornton, an idealistic young officer who actually believed peace was possible between whites and Apaches. About their father's fury when he learned of the relationship. About the tribe's shame when Liluye married Thornton and bore his children. My brother Taza, Catherine said, and her voice went cold. He was youngest, always trying to prove himself, always worried about honor, about purity, about what the old warriors thought. When Liluye gave birth to mixed-blood twins, he saw it as pollution, as shame that had to be cleansed. He killed his own sister. He found them on the trail. Thornton had deserted the army to protect Liluye, trying to reach Mexico. Taza and his warriors ambushed them, killed Liluye while she held her babies, stabbed Thornton, left him for dead, tried to kill the twins. But you stopped him. I tracked them, found the babies just hours after the attack. Thornton was gone, probably died in the desert. Taza had fled, thinking me dead also. I've been running ever since. 6 months, keeping these children alive, staying ahead of the army and my brother both. Caleb looked at her with new understanding. That's why you're so good at this. The running, the hiding, the fighting. You've been doing it alone for half a year. Not anymore, Catherine said. Now I have help, whether I wanted it or not. Do you? Want it, I mean? She met his eyes across the fire. Hers were dark, unreadable, full of shadows. I don't know, she said honestly. I've learned not to trust anyone. Every time I've relied on someone, they've either died or betrayed me. So yes, I want help. I need it. But wanting and trusting are different things. Fair enough, Caleb said. I don't trust easy either. But I'll make you a promise. I won't abandon these children. Not while I'm breathing. You can count on that. Catherine studied him for a long moment, then nodded once. Then we have an alliance, built on shared purpose, if not trust. It's more than most partnerships have. The next morning, Caleb made the dangerous trip to Fort Apache. He went alone, in darkness, leaving Catherine and her warriors to protect the babies. It was 40 miles of hard riding through snow and rock, and every mile he expected to run into a patrol. But he made it. Just before dawn, he slipped over the fort's wall at a weak point he remembered from his army days. Found the quartermaster's office. Found Danny O'Brien bent over paperwork, looking older and more tired than Caleb remembered. Jesus Christ, Danny breathed when Caleb appeared in his doorway. Bear, I heard you were dead. Nearly, Caleb said. More than once. Danny, I need a favor. They talked quickly, quietly. Caleb explained the situation, or at least a version of it. 2 babies who needed safe passage. An Apache woman traveling with them. A journey to Mescalero. Nothing illegal, just complicated by army politics. Danny listened with the face of a man who'd learned not to ask too many questions. You're wanted for desertion, Danny said finally. Official charges were filed back in '69. There's a file. If Carrington connects you to the mountain man hiding fugitives, you're looking at a court-martial. I know. And you're doing this anyway, for babies that aren't even yours. Caleb thought about Jacob, about holding his son's body while life drained away, about 5 years of guilt and grief and trying to forget. They are now, he said simply. Danny sighed, ran a hand through his graying hair. You saved my life at Shiloh, took a Confederate bullet meant for me. I've never forgotten that. So yes, I'll help you. But after this, we're even. Agreed? Agreed. Danny worked quickly, forging documents with practiced skill. Marriage certificate for Samuel and Maria Hartwell. Travel permits for Santa Fe. Letters of introduction from a fictional merchant in Phoenix. Best I can do on short notice, Danny said, handing over the papers. Should get you past casual inspection, but if someone looks close, if they telegraph for verification, you're cooked. I'll take that chance. Caleb was halfway out the window when Danny's voice stopped him. Bear, one more thing. There's wanted posters going up. Captain James Thornton, desertion and murder. Reward is $1,000. Last seen near the Mexican border. Caleb went still. Thornton's alive? Maybe, maybe not. But someone saw someone matching his description 3 weeks ago. Figured you should know, given the connection to those babies. Caleb nodded his thanks and disappeared into the pre-dawn darkness. He made it back to his cabin before noon, papers hidden in his coat, mind spinning with new information. Thornton might be alive, the baby's father, the man with the real claim to them. He should have felt relief, should have been glad there was someone with legal rights, someone who could take this burden off his shoulders. Instead, he felt something uncomfortably close to loss. Catherine noticed his mood immediately. She had that warrior's instinct for reading people. "What happened?" she asked. He told her about the papers, about Danny's help, about Thornton possibly being alive. Catherine's reaction was complex. Relief and worry, and something else he couldn't quite name. "If James lives," she said slowly, "the babies have their real father. Someone with legal rights the army can't easily challenge. But we don't know where he is. Don't know if he's wounded, hiding, dying. And we can't wait. Carrington will be back with warrants any day. We move now, or we don't move at all." That night they made final preparations. At dawn they would start the journey. 250 miles to Mescalero, through country that wanted them dead. Caleb was checking the horses one last time when Catherine's warriors gave a low warning call. Someone approaching. Fast. They took defensive positions. Caleb grabbed his rifle. Catherine pulled the babies close. A single rider burst from the tree line. Apache, by the look of him. Young, maybe 30, moving with the fluid grace of someone born to the saddle. He reined up hard 20 yards from the cabin. His face was scarred, cruel in the way faces get when they've seen too much violence and decided to embrace it. Catherine went rigid beside Caleb. "Taza," she breathed. "My brother." The warrior who'd killed his own sister, who wanted these babies dead. He sat his horse calmly, making no move for his weapons. But his eyes, when they found Catherine, burned with righteous fury. "Sister!" he called in Apache. Catherine translated for Caleb in low, tense words. "You dishonor our family. Those white man's bastards poison our blood. Give them to me. Let me cleanse this shame." "They're children," Catherine shouted back in Apache. "Our sister's children. How does killing them honor anything?" "They are abomination. You choose white dog over your brother? Over your people?" Catherine stepped forward, putting herself between Taza and the cabin, between her brother and the babies. "I choose life over death," she said. "I choose mercy over murder. And if that makes me your enemy, brother, then so be it." Taza's hand moved to his rifle. Caleb's Winchester was up and aimed in one smooth motion. "Move, and you're dead," Caleb said quietly in Apache. Broken Apache, but clear enough. Taza looked at him, really looked, saw the rifle, saw the stance, saw a man who'd killed before and would again. "You choose this, sister?" Taza spat. "White man who reeks of death? For half-breed children who will never belong anywhere?" "I choose them over you," Catherine said. Her voice was steel. "Leave, Taza, while you still can." For a long moment, the clearing held its breath. Then Taza yanked his horse's head around and galloped away, disappearing into the trees as suddenly as he'd appeared. But not before throwing back one last shout. "This isn't over. The spirits will judge you, sister. They'll judge you both." Silence fell like snow, heavy, cold, absolute. Inside the cabin, Mourning Dove started crying, a thin, frightened sound that pulled at something deep in Caleb's chest. He lowered the rifle, looked at Catherine, saw the pain in her eyes, the grief of choosing strangers' children over her own brother. "We leave before dawn," he said. "He'll be back, with more warriors. We need to be gone." Catherine nodded, went inside to comfort the crying baby. But at the door, she paused and looked back at Caleb. "Thank you," she said, "for standing with me." "Thank you," Caleb replied, "for giving me something worth standing for." That night, while Catherine and her warriors kept watch and the babies slept, Caleb sat by his forge one last time. He was leaving this place, the sanctuary he'd built, the loneliness he'd chosen. He looked at the photograph on the altar. Emma and Jacob, frozen in time, forever smiling. "I'm going back into the world," he told them. "After 5 years hiding, I'm going back. Not because I'm brave, because 2 babies need me. Because if I don't do this, I'll spend the rest of my life knowing I could have saved them and chose not to." The photograph didn't answer, but in the flicker of firelight, it almost seemed like Emma smiled. At dawn, they rode east. Caleb on his big mountain horse, Catherine on a paint stallion, the twins in specially designed carriers that distributed their weight evenly. 4 Apache warriors as scouts and guards. Behind them, the cabin grew smaller, a dot, then nothing. Ahead, 250 miles of desert, mountain, and enemies who wanted them dead. But also ahead, maybe, was sanctuary, safety, a place where 2 babies could grow up knowing both their worlds. It was a slim hope, but hope was better than nothing. Hope was what kept you moving when everything said stop. And Caleb McAllister, who'd forgotten how to hope 5 years ago, was learning again, 1 mile at a time. The White Mountains of Arizona Territory were beautiful in the way a knife was beautiful. Sharp edges, hard surfaces, unforgiving of mistakes. They'd been traveling for 6 days when the attack came. 6 days of careful movement through country that could kill you a dozen different ways. Freezing nights huddled around fires that couldn't be too large or they'd give away position. Days spent watching the horizon for dust clouds that meant cavalry patrols, or worse. The twins had adjusted to travel better than Caleb expected, lulled to sleep by the rhythm of the horses, waking only to feed, and then settling again into that trusting sleep that broke his heart every time he saw it. Catherine rode like she'd been born in the saddle, probably had been. Apache children learned to ride before they learned to walk. She handled her paint stallion with unconscious skill, one hand on the reins, the other always near her rifle. Her warriors scouted ahead and behind, invisible ghosts in the landscape, until you needed them. Caleb had forgotten what it felt like to be part of a unit, to trust the people around you with your life. 5 years alone had made him an island, but islands could become peninsulas if the right bridge was built. They were following the Salt River Canyon when Catherine pulled up suddenly, her hand raised in a signal that meant, "Stop, danger, be ready." Caleb reined in his horse, scanned the canyon walls rising on either side. Nothing visible, but Catherine's instincts had kept her alive for 6 months on the run. If she sensed danger, there was danger. "What is it?" he asked quietly. "Too quiet," she said. "No birds, no insects. Something's wrong." She was right. The canyon was silent in a way that felt unnatural. Even the wind had stopped, as if holding its breath. Then the first arrow hit the ground 3 feet from Caleb's horse. A warning shot. Could have hit him or the animal if the shooter wanted. This was deliberate. Someone announcing their presence. "Ambush!" Catherine shouted. "Taza!" Apache warriors materialized from the rocks above, like spirits conjured from stone. Caleb counted quickly. 10, maybe 12. Too many. They'd ridden into a killing box. High walls on either side meant no escape, except forward or back. Either direction meant exposing their backs to the shooters above. Catherine's warriors responded instantly, professional soldiers, despite never wearing uniforms. They positioned their horses to create a defensive circle, rifles coming up. But they were outnumbered and outpositioned. Caleb's mind raced through options. They couldn't fight, couldn't run. That left one choice: negotiate. He stood in his stirrups, hands visible and empty. "Taza!" he shouted in his broken Apache. "We talk. No kill babies." For a long moment, nothing. Then a figure appeared on the rocks above. Catherine's brother. Even from 50 yards away, Caleb could see the hate burning in his eyes. Taza shouted something in rapid Apache. Catherine translated in a whisper, her voice tight with tension. "He says we dishonor the Apache people. Says mixed-blood children are poison. Says the spirits demand purification." "Tell him the spirits didn't leave 2 babies to freeze on a mountain," Caleb said. "Tell him if the spirits wanted them dead, they'd be dead already." Catherine called up to her brother. Her voice carried authority, even when shouting at someone who wanted her dead. Chief's daughter. Warrior. Someone who'd commanded respect before Taza's fanaticism had torn their family apart. Taza responded. A long speech, passionate and angry. Catherine's face grew paler as she listened. "What's he saying?" Caleb asked. "He's explaining why he killed Liluye," Catherine said quietly. "He says when our mother died in an army raid, he was 10 years old. Liluye was the only one who remembered their mother's songs, her stories. When Liluye married Thornton, chose the white world, Taza felt like she chose the people who killed their mother over her own blood." Caleb felt something shift in his understanding. Taza wasn't just a fanatic. He was a wounded child, wrapped in a warrior's body, striking out at the thing that hurt him most. "He's in pain," Caleb said. "So am I," Catherine replied. "But I didn't murder anyone." Taza began climbing down from the rocks. His warriors kept their weapons trained on Caleb's group, but they didn't fire. Their leader wanted to talk. That meant there was still a chance. Taza reached the canyon floor and walked forward until he stood 20 feet from Catherine's horse. Brother and sister faced each other across a distance measured in more than yards. When Taza spoke this time, his voice was different, raw, broken. Catherine translated, her own voice unsteady. "He says he dreams about Liluye every night, sees her face when he closes his eyes, hears her voice calling him brother the way she did when they were children. He says killing her didn't make the pain stop. It made it worse, made it permanent." Caleb saw tears on Taza's scarred face, saw a man drowning in grief and looking for any lifeline, even one made of hate and righteous anger. "Tell him I understand," Caleb said quietly. "Tell him I killed people I shouldn't have killed. Tell him I know what it's like to carry that weight. And tell him that killing these babies won't fix it, won't bring his sister back. Will just add more weight to carry." Catherine translated. Taza listened, his eyes moving from her to Caleb, to the twins sleeping peacefully in their carriers. For the first time, he really looked at them. Not as symbols of shame, not as political problems, as human beings, as family. Taza took a step forward, then another. Catherine tensed, her hand moving toward her knife, but Caleb touched her arm gently. "Wait." Taza reached Mourning Dove's carrier. The baby was awake now, disturbed by the shouting. She looked up at this scarred stranger with her mismatched eyes, one brown, one green. And she didn't cry, just watched him with that intense baby stare that seems to see straight into your soul. Taza's hand, rough from weapons and weather, reached out with surprising gentleness to touch her face. His fingers traced the curve of her cheek. His lips moved in words too quiet to hear. Catherine leaned forward in her saddle. "What did you say, brother?" Taza looked up, and Caleb saw something in his face that might have been the beginning of understanding, or maybe just exhaustion. "She has Liluye's nose," Taza said in English, the words heavily accented but clear. "Her mouth. In her face, I see our sister. Yes, Catherine said softly. They carry her forward, her blood, her spirit. Killing them would kill the last part of her that remains. Taza stood very still, a man at a crossroads, choosing which path would define the rest of his life. Finally, he stepped back, raised his hand to his warriors, spoke in Apache. The rifles lowered. I cannot accept them, Taza said. Cannot bless this mixing of worlds. But I will not pursue you further. This I swear by our mother's memory. He looked at Catherine one last time. If you succeed in reaching Mescalero, if they grow strong and safe, send word to me. Perhaps one day, when I have made peace with Liluye's ghost, I can meet them as uncle, not as killer. Then he was gone, climbing back up the rocks with his warriors, disappearing as suddenly as they'd appeared. The canyon returned to silence. But this time it felt different. Less like death waiting, more like peace, tentative and fragile. Catherine's hands were shaking. Caleb could see them trembling on the reins. The aftermath of adrenaline and emotion. The realization of how close they'd come to dying. Come on, he said gently. Let's put some distance behind us. We can rest when the canyon opens up. They rode for 2 more hours before Catherine's composure finally broke. It happened at a place where the canyon widened into a small meadow with a stream running through it. Good defensive position, water for the horses, shelter from the wind. Caleb set up camp while Catherine's warriors took watch positions. The babies needed feeding and changing. The horses needed tending. All the small tasks that kept you alive in hard country. He was building a fire when he heard it, a sound he'd never heard from Catherine before. Crying. She sat on a rock by the stream, shoulders shaking, face buried in her hands. Strong Catherine, warrior Catherine, breaking under the weight of everything she'd been carrying for 6 months. Caleb approached carefully, the way you'd approach a wounded animal, dangerous even in vulnerability. Catherine? She looked up, tears tracking through the dust on her face. I almost had to kill my brother today, or watch him kill these babies. My family is destroyed, my sister dead, my father ashamed of me, my brother unable to even look at me without seeing betrayal. But the babies are alive, Caleb said. That's what matters. Is it? She wiped her face with the back of her hand. Some days I'm not sure. Some days I think Taza might be right. These children will never belong anywhere. Too Apache for the white world. Too white for the Apache world. What kind of life is that? Caleb sat down beside her, not touching, but close enough that she'd know she wasn't alone. I don't know what kind of life it is, he said, but I know it's a life. And life means possibility, means choice. Those babies will grow up and decide for themselves who they are, what world they belong to. Maybe both, maybe neither. But they get to choose. That's worth fighting for. Catherine looked at him, really looked. And for the first time, Caleb saw something in her eyes besides wariness and determination. He saw trust beginning to form. You're a good man, Caleb McAllister, she said. Better than you think you are. I'm a man trying not to be the man I was, Caleb replied. That's all. They sat in silence for a while, listening to the stream, to the wind, to the small sounds of camp being made ready for night. The twins were sleeping in the warm space near the fire, peaceful and unaware of how close they'd come to never waking up. Tell me about Danny O'Brien, Catherine said eventually. The man who forged our papers. Why does he owe you?" Caleb didn't particularly want to talk about Shiloh. About April 1862, when he'd been 20 and thought war was something glorious. Before he'd learned what shrapnel did to human bodies, what artillery fire sounded like when it caught men in the open. But Catherine had shared her pain. Fair was fair. "We were in the same company," he said, "fighting near a place called the Peach Orchard. Beautiful name for a place that turned into hell. Confederate forces hit us hard, broke our line. Danny took a bayonet through the leg, went down. Rebel soldier standing over him, about to finish it." Caleb's hands clenched reflexively, remembering the weight of the rifle, the split-second decision, the way the Confederate soldier had dropped. "I shot him. The rebel. Center mass. He went down, and Danny lived. Simple as that. War reduces everything to simple mathematics. This person lives, that person dies. Add and subtract until someone runs out of soldiers." "You saved his life." "I took someone else's. Even trade in war's accounting. But Danny remembered, kept track of me after. When I deserted in '69, he could have reported me. Didn't. When I needed help now, he gave it. Debts like that don't expire." Catherine nodded slowly. "Among my people, a life debt is sacred. You carry it until balanced. Danny is a man of honor." "He's a man trying to survive in a system designed to grind men down," Caleb said. "Like most of us." That night, after the babies were fed and sleeping, after Catherine's warriors had set watch rotations, Caleb found himself teaching Catherine how to play poker. They used dried beans for currency, and Catherine picked up the game with alarming speed. "You're cheating," Caleb said, after she won the fourth hand in a row. "I'm learning," Catherine corrected, a rare smile crossing her face. "There's a difference." It was a moment of normalcy in circumstances that were anything but normal. Two people who'd been strangers a week ago, now sharing warmth and simple pleasure, while the desert night pressed close and enemies circled in the dark. Morning Dove woke crying around midnight. Caleb took his turn walking her, rocking the small body gently while humming Irish songs his grandmother had taught him a lifetime ago. The baby's mismatched eyes looked up at him, and he felt something in his chest tighten. He was getting attached. Dangerous thing to do with children that weren't his, that would eventually go to their real family. But he couldn't help it. Couldn't stop himself from caring. Catherine watched from her bedroll, pretending to sleep but tracking his movements. When Morning Dove finally settled and Caleb laid her back down, Catherine spoke softly. "You're good with her." "Had practice once," Caleb said. "Long time ago. Jacob would be proud of you, doing this, protecting other children." The words hit harder than Caleb expected. He had to swallow before he could speak. "Maybe. Or maybe he'd wonder why I couldn't save him, but I'm breaking my back to save strangers." "Because you couldn't save him," Catherine said simply. "Because some things are beyond our control. But these babies, right now, they're not beyond your control. You can save them. That's not betrayal of Jacob's memory. It's honoring it." They reached Silver City 5 days later. A rough mining town clinging to the side of a mountain, 200 souls looking for silver, and mostly finding disappointment. But it had supplies they needed, and more importantly, it was one of the last places they could resupply before the long push to Mescalero. The plan was simple. Caleb and Catherine would enter town as Samuel and Maria Hartwell, married couple traveling to Santa Fe. Catherine would play the role of Mexican wife, which meant keeping her eyes down and her mouth mostly shut, a role she hated but understood was necessary. The forged papers were good. Danny O'Brien knew his craft, but papers were only as convincing as the people carrying them. They tied their horses outside a general store. Catherine adjusted the shawl covering her hair, making sure her Apache features were partially hidden. Caleb carried little Eagle in one arm, trying to look like a normal father on a normal errand. The store was dim and smelled of flour and tobacco and unwashed bodies. The owner, a heavy-set man with suspicious eyes, looked up from his counter. "Help you folks?" "Need supplies," Caleb said, keeping his accent neutral, neither too educated nor too rough. "Flour, coffee, jerked meat, some canned milk for the babies." The owner's eyes moved to Catherine, lingering too long. "Your wife don't speak English?" "Some," Caleb said. "She's from Chihuahua, learning more every day." A lie, but a believable one. There were enough Mexican families in the territory that a white man with a Mexican wife raised no eyebrows. They were halfway through gathering supplies when a miner stumbled in, drunk at 10 in the morning. His eyes were red, his breath foul. He looked at Catherine, and his face twisted with ugly recognition. "That ain't no Mexican," he slurred. "That's an Apache squaw. I seen enough of them to know." The store went quiet. The owner's hand moved under the counter, probably to a gun. Other miners in the store turned to look. Suddenly, Caleb and Catherine were surrounded by hostile eyes in a confined space. This was the moment when everything could go wrong, when good papers and good lies wouldn't be enough against mob instinct and fear. Caleb set down the supplies he'd been holding, stepped between Catherine and the drunk miner. When he spoke, his voice was calm, but carried the kind of authority that came from years of command. "My wife is Mexican. We have papers if you need to see them, but I'd appreciate it if you'd keep your opinions to yourself. We're just here to buy supplies and be on our way." The drunk miner took a step forward. "I say she's Apache. I say you're lying." Before Caleb could respond, a woman's voice cut through the tension. "Gentlemen, these are paying customers. They have proper documentation. Unless one of you wants to explain to Marshal Pike why you're harassing legal travelers, I suggest you let them complete their business." The voice belonged to the store owner's wife, Sarah Whitmore. She'd appeared from the back room, and despite being a head shorter than any man present, she commanded the space like a general. The drunk miner muttered something about not wanting trouble, backing down. The other miners lost interest, going back to their own concerns. Crisis averted by a woman who understood that business was business, regardless of skin color. When they'd finished purchasing supplies and left the store, Sarah followed them outside. "I know who you are," she said quietly. "Word travels. Apache woman protecting babies, mountain man helping her. There's talk." Caleb's hand moved toward his knife. "What are you going to do about it?" "Nothing," Sarah said. "I lost a child 5 years ago. Cholera. I'll never forget what it felt like, holding her while she died. If you're protecting babies, keeping them alive, then you're doing God's work as far as I'm concerned. Go, fast, before someone decides that drunk miner was right." They rode out of Silver City within the hour, supplies loaded, babies secure, Catherine's disguise intact but fragile. One town down, many more dangers ahead. But for the first time since this journey began, Caleb felt something he hadn't felt in years. He felt like maybe, just maybe, there were enough good people in the world to balance out the bad. Maybe humanity wasn't entirely lost. Maybe there was still hope. The Santa Rita Mountains rose like broken teeth against a sky so blue it hurt to look at. They'd been traveling for 3 weeks now, and the journey was changing everyone. The babies had grown stronger, more alert. Catherine had grown quieter, more watchful. And Caleb had grown something he couldn't quite name. Not softer, but maybe less hard. less like stone and more like wood. Still strong, but with grain and texture, with capacity for growth. They were 2 days from the New Mexico border when the bandits hit them. 5 white men, desperate and mean, the kind who turned to robbery because every other door had closed. They came out of a narrow pass in the rocks, rifles raised, surrounding Caleb's group before anyone could react. The leader was a rail-thin man with a scar across his throat that made his voice come out raspy and wrong. "Well now, mountain man, his woman, and some papooses. Hand over your horses and supplies. Do it quick, and we let you live." Caleb's hand was on his rifle, but the mathematics were bad. 5 guns against his group, with babies in the middle. Even if they won the fight, a stray bullet could end everything. Catherine spoke quietly beside him. "Trust me, I have a plan." Then, louder, in accented English, "Please, senor, we have little, but I show you where we hide gold, in saddlebags, my husband's life savings." The bandits perked up at the word gold. Greed did what fear couldn't, made them careless. 3 of them moved toward the horses, rifles lowering as they focused on potential treasure instead of potential threat. That's when Catherine's warriors struck. They'd been hidden in the rocks above, invisible until they wanted to be seen. The ambush reversed in seconds. 2 bandits went down with arrows in them before they knew what was happening. A third took a rifle butt to the head from one of Catherine's men who'd circled behind during the distraction. The remaining 2, including the leader, dropped their weapons and ran. Smart enough to know when they'd been outplayed. Catherine turned to Caleb with something that might have been amusement in her eyes. "You see? Strategy beats strength." "You planned that whole thing?" "I saw the tracks 2 hours ago. Knew someone was following us. Positioned my warriors accordingly. Let the bandits think they had the advantage." Caleb shook his head in genuine admiration. "You're a better tactician than half the officers I served under." "My father trained me from childhood. Said the best warrior is the one who wins without fighting. But if fighting is necessary, make sure you've already won before the first blow lands." They buried the dead bandits in shallow graves, not out of respect, but because leaving bodies drew scavengers, and scavengers drew attention. Then they pushed on, covering another 10 miles before making camp. That night, Caleb found himself teaching Catherine the finer points of rifle marksmanship. She was good with a bow, deadly accurate up to 100 yards. But rifles were different. Longer range, different calculations for wind and distance. "Squeeze the trigger," he said, standing behind her, guiding her aim at a tree branch 50 yards away. "Don't pull. Let it surprise you when it goes off." She fired. The branch exploded into splinters. "Like that?" she asked, and there was definite amusement in her voice now. "Exactly like that. Though I suspect you didn't need the lesson." "No," she admitted, "but I liked hearing you teach. You're good at it. Patient." "My father was never patient." They sat by the fire after, watching the stars emerge one by one. The babies slept between them, small, warm bundles of humanity that had somehow become the center of both their worlds. "Tell me about Mescalero," Catherine said. "About this grandfather Chayton who might help us. What makes you trust him?" Caleb poked at the fire with a stick, sending sparks spiraling into the darkness. "Met him 10 years ago. I was scouting for the army. He was negotiating peace terms for his people. Most medicine men I'd met were suspicious of whites. Rightfully so. But Chayton was different. He looked at you like he could see past your skin, past your uniform, straight to who you actually were. And what did he see in you? A man trying to do right in a wrong situation. He told me something I never forgot. Said there are two types of people in war. Those who fight because they hate the enemy, and those who fight because they love what's behind them. Said the first type becomes monster. The second type stays human. Catherine was quiet for a long moment. Which type are you? Used to think I was the second type, fighting to protect settlers, protect civilization. But after Sand Creek, after watching soldiers massacre women and children, I realized I'd been protecting the monsters. So I stopped fighting entirely. Figured if I couldn't tell right from wrong, safer not to choose. And now? Caleb looked at the sleeping twins. Now, I know what I'm fighting for. And it's not complicated. Not about nation or race or politics. Just two babies who deserve to grow up. That's simple enough, even I can't get it wrong. They crossed into New Mexico territory on a morning when the sky looked like hammered copper. The landscape changed subtly. Less pine, more juniper. The air smelled different, felt different, like they'd crossed some invisible boundary into new possibilities. But with new territory came new dangers. They were following a dry wash when one of Catherine's warriors came galloping back from his scouting position, his face tight with urgency. He spoke rapid Apache to Catherine, and Caleb watched her expression shift from concern to alarm. What is it? Cavalry patrol, 40 men, 5 miles south and moving toward us. Fast. Carrington? The scout says yes, the colonel himself leading them. They'd known this was coming. Carrington wasn't the type to give up. The question had always been when, not if. But 40 men was more than they could fight. Even with Catherine's warriors, even with surprise on their side. We need to hide, Caleb said. Find some place defensible. Wait them out. Catherine shook her head. They're tracking us. Fresh tracks in the dust. We can't hide what we've already revealed. One of her warriors spoke up, pointing east. Catherine listened, then nodded slowly. 3 miles that way, there's old Anasazi ruins, stone structures built into canyon walls. Multiple exits. Defensible if we have to fight, but also easy to escape from if we choose that path. It was the best option they had. They rode hard, pushing the horses to the edge of their endurance. The twins sensed the urgency, stayed quiet as if they understood that making noise now could mean danger. The ruins appeared like a mirage. Ancient dwellings carved into red sandstone cliffs, abandoned centuries ago by people who'd disappeared into history. The structures were weathered but intact, accessible only by narrow paths that could be defended by 1 or 2 fighters. They'd just finished climbing to the main dwelling level when they saw the dust cloud. Carrington's cavalry, visible on the horizon, coming fast. We could fight, one of Catherine's warriors said. Good position here. And kill federal soldiers? Catherine replied. That makes us not protectors, but murderers in the eyes of white law. It gives Carrington everything he needs to hunt us forever. Then what do we do? Caleb asked. Catherine was thinking, her mind working through possibilities. Then her eyes lit with an idea. We use their law against them. Again. She explained quickly. It was risky, depended on Carrington being the kind of officer who cared about regulations and proper procedure. But it might work. The cavalry arrived an hour later. They surrounded the base of the ruins, but didn't immediately attack. Carrington rode forward alone, his posture rigid with anger and exhaustion. McAllister, Miss Nalnish, I know you're up there. Come down immediately. This is your last warning. Catherine stepped to the edge where Carrington could see her. She held both twins, making sure they were visible, making sure Carrington could see exactly what he was threatening. When she spoke, her voice carried clear and strong in the desert air. "Colonel Carrington, I invoke the right of petition. Under the Indian Civil Rights Act, I have the right to petition for tribal custody of these children before any federal removal action. That petition must be heard by a neutral magistrate, not military authority." Carrington's face went red. "That act doesn't apply here." "It applies to any contested custody of Indian children, Colonel. You know the law. If you take these children without proper hearing, every treaty tribe in the territory will have legal grounds to challenge federal authority. Is that what you want? A legal precedent that undermines the entire reservation system?" It was brilliant. Catherine was using the government's own convoluted legal structure against itself. Carrington could force the issue, take the babies by military power, but doing so would open legal challenges that could tie up courts for years. Caleb watched the colonel's face as he calculated, watched him realize he'd been outmaneuvered again. "You're stalling," Carrington said finally. "Buying time." "I'm exercising legal rights," Catherine countered. "Something you claim to represent. Or does the rule of law only apply when convenient for the United States Army?" The standoff held for what felt like hours, but was probably minutes. Then a new voice called out from below, "Colonel Carrington, stand down!" A single rider approached. Not cavalry. A civilian with a badge. Marshal Henry Pike, the same lawman they'd heard about from Danny O'Brien. A man with a reputation for fairness in country where fairness was rare. Pike rode up beside Carrington, the two men conferring in voices too low to hear. Caleb saw Carrington's posture get even more rigid, if that was possible. Saw him gesture angrily. Saw Pike shake his head calmly. Finally, Carrington wheeled his horse around and shouted to his men, "Mount up! We're returning to Fort Apache." Just like that, the cavalry withdrew, 40 men turning their horses and riding away, leaving Catherine and Caleb and the babies untouched. Marshal Pike remained behind. He dismounted and began climbing the narrow path to the ruins, alone, unarmed, his hands visible. Caleb and Catherine met him at the dwelling entrance. Up close, Pike was older than he'd seemed from a distance, maybe 55, weathered face, kind eyes, the sort of man who'd seen enough of life to understand that right and wrong weren't always clear. "Ma'am," he said to Catherine. "Sir," to Caleb. "I'm Marshal Henry Pike. I'm not here to arrest you or take those babies. I'm here because someone needs to make sure this situation gets resolved without anyone dying." "Carrington will be back," Catherine said. "Probably," Pike agreed. "But not today, and maybe not tomorrow. I had a long conversation with a certain Irish sergeant who explained some things about Colonel Carrington's methods, things that, if made public, would end his career. So the colonel and I have an understanding now. He leaves you alone long enough to reach wherever you're going. In exchange, certain testimony doesn't reach certain ears in Washington." "You're protecting us?" Caleb asked, not quite believing it. "I'm protecting the law," Pike said. "Real law, not the kind that gets twisted to serve ambition. Those babies have rights. You have rights. And I'm too old and too tired to watch those rights get trampled just because it's convenient." He handed Catherine a document. "Official petition for tribal custody hearing, filed with territorial court. Gives you legal standing until a judge can review the case. Should buy you at least a month, maybe 2. "Why are you doing this?" Catherine asked. Pike looked at the twins, sleeping peacefully, despite everything happening around them. Because I had a daughter once, lost her to typhoid when she was 3, and I remember what it felt like, holding her, knowing I couldn't save her. You two are trying to save these babies. That's worth something. Worth a lot, actually. He turned to leave, then paused. There's one more thing. Captain James Thornton, the baby's father. He's alive. Saw him myself 3 days ago in Santa Fe. He's heading to Mescalero, same place you're going. Thought you should know. The news hit Caleb like a physical blow. Thornton, alive. The real father, coming to claim his children, which meant Caleb's time with the twins had an expiration date. He should have felt relief, should have been glad the babies would have their actual father. Instead, he felt loss opening up inside him like a canyon. Pike left them with that news, left them standing in ancient ruins built by people long dead, trying to figure out what came next. Catherine looked at Caleb. You're upset about Thornton? No, Caleb lied. Then, yes, I don't know. These aren't my children. I knew that from the start. But somewhere along the way, I forgot it. Started thinking of them as mine. Stupid. Not stupid, Catherine said gently. Human. You love them. That's not something you control. Little Eagle chose that moment to wake, reaching his small hands toward Caleb. The baby's fingers wrapped around Caleb's thumb with surprising strength, and Caleb felt his throat tighten. Come on, Catherine said. We're 2 days from Mescalero now. Let's finish this journey. Whatever comes after, we'll face it together. Together. The word had weight, had meaning. Caleb realized that somewhere in 3 weeks of hard travel, he and Catherine had become more than allies, had become something like friends, maybe something more, though neither of them was ready to name it yet. They climbed down from the ruins and mounted their horses. The sun was setting, painting the desert in shades of gold and red. Ahead, somewhere beyond the horizon, lay Mescalero, lay sanctuary, lay answers. And somewhere ahead, James Thornton rode toward his children, the last piece of a complicated puzzle coming into place. The Mescalero Apache Reservation appeared like a promise on the horizon. After 3 weeks of running, of hiding, of sleeping with one eye open and a hand on a weapon, they'd finally reached something that looked like sanctuary. But Caleb had learned long ago that promises could be broken. The reservation was different from what he'd expected. Not the desperate poverty he'd seen at other Indian agencies, though there was hardship here too, but also structure, order. Log cabins stood alongside traditional wickiups, a small mission church with a cross that caught the afternoon sun, fields where corn grew in neat rows, tended by Apache farmers who'd learned to work the land in new ways without forgetting the old. It was a place caught between 2 worlds, just like the twins they carried. They were met at the boundary by Mescalero scouts who'd been watching their approach for the last 5 miles. Professional men who assessed the threat level in seconds and decided that a mountain man, an Apache woman, 2 babies, and 4 exhausted warriors didn't constitute an invasion. One of the scouts spoke to Catherine in rapid Apache. She responded, and Caleb caught enough words to understand they were being escorted to the council house. To Grandfather Chayton. The old medicine man was exactly as Caleb remembered, maybe a bit more weathered, a few more lines in his face, but the same sharp intelligence in eyes that had gone mostly blind with age. Chayton sat in front of a large wickiup, surrounded by younger men who were clearly tribal elders, waiting. Catherine dismounted first, showing proper respect. She approached with the twins and spoke in formal Apache, introducing herself, explaining their situation. Caleb stayed back, letting her take the lead. This was her world, her people. He was just the white man who'd helped along the way. But Chayton's milky eyes found him anyway, tracking him with the precision of someone who saw with more than just vision. "Caleb McAllister," the old man said in English, accented but clear. "The blacksmith who tried to stop a massacre. I wondered if you were dead." "Nearly was, more than once. And yet here you stand, with Apache woman and mixed-blood babies. Life has strange paths, yes?" "Yes," Caleb agreed. "Strange paths." Chayton gestured for them to sit. For the next hour, Catherine explained everything. Her sister's death, Taza's fanaticism, the months of running, Carrington's pursuit, the journey here. She spoke with the eloquence of a chief's daughter, making their case not with emotion, but with logic and law. The tribal elders listened, asked questions, debated in Apache that was too fast and complex for Caleb to follow. He held Little Eagle during this, the baby content to chew on his finger and make small noises that somehow felt like trust made audible. Finally, Chayton raised his hand for silence. When he spoke, everyone listened. "These children carry prophecy," he said. "Old words from old times. Words that say when Apache people face final darkness, twin children will come, one marked by earth, one marked by sky. They will choose, walk in two worlds, or let both worlds die in war." He reached out, and Catherine brought Mourning Dove close enough for the old man to touch. His weathered fingers traced the baby's face, paused at her eyes. "Green eye," he murmured. "Sky eye. And the boy, he has earthmark, yes? Eagle sign?" "Yes, grandfather," Catherine confirmed. "Then prophecy speaks true. But prophecy does not command. It offers choice. These children must be protected until they are old enough to choose their path." One of the younger elders spoke up, voicing what Caleb suspected others were thinking. "Protection brings danger. Army will come here. Whites will accuse us of harboring fugitives. We risk everything for children not of our band." "We risk nothing," an older woman's voice cut through the debate. She emerged from behind the council, a stern-faced Apache woman who moved with the authority of someone who'd earned respect through decades of wisdom. This was Desba, Caleb remembered. War woman, one of the few female elders who sat in council. "These children are Chief DeSoto's blood," Desba continued. "White Mountain Apache, yes, but Apache still. To refuse them is to break bonds between bands, is to say blood means nothing when convenient." The debate continued. Some wanted to help. Others feared the consequences. It was democracy in action, messy and real, and nothing like the decisive commands Caleb was used to from military life. While the elders argued, Catherine moved close to Caleb. "This could go either way," she whispered. "If they refuse us, we have nowhere left to run." "Then we make our own place," Caleb said. "Build a cabin somewhere remote. Raise them ourselves." Catherine looked at him with something that might have been surprise. "You'd do that? Give up everything? Live as fugitive? For babies that aren't yours?" "They're mine now," Caleb said simply. "Blood doesn't make family. Choice does." Before Catherine could respond, a commotion erupted at the edge of the village. Shouting, the sound of a horse ridden hard. Everyone turned to look. A single rider galloped toward the council house. White man, Caleb could tell from the posture, the way he sat his horse. The rider was gaunt, bearded, wearing the remnants of a cavalry uniform so torn and dirty it was barely recognizable. He reined up 20 feet away, dismounted with the stiffness of someone who'd been in the saddle too long. When he spoke, his voice was hoarse from thirst and exhaustion. "I'm Captain James Thornton. I'm looking for my children. I was told they might be here." The world seemed to stop. Caleb felt Catherine go rigid beside him, felt his own heart begin to hammer against his ribs. The baby's father, alive, here. Thornton's eyes swept the gathering, stopping when they found the twins. His face, weathered and scarred from whatever he'd been through, crumpled into something raw and vulnerable. "My babies," he whispered. "You're alive. You're really alive." He took a step forward, and Catherine moved to intercept him, not hostile, but protective. "James," she said, "brother-in-law, we thought you dead." "Nearly was." Thornton couldn't take his eyes off the twins. "Taza's knife got me in the side, left me bleeding in the desert. Mexican farmers found me, nursed me back. Took months to heal. By the time I could travel, you'd disappeared. I've been searching ever since, following rumors, following hope." Grandfather Chayton spoke, his voice cutting through the emotion. "This man claims the children, by blood, by law, by father's right. What say you, Thunder Walker's daughter?" Catherine looked at Thornton, looked at Caleb, looked at the twins who'd been her entire world for 6 months. "I say," she began carefully, "that these children need more than one guardian. James is their blood father, but he is wanted man, hunted by army. How can he protect them from prison?" Thornton's face fell because he knew she was right. "I can't. I came here to see them, to know they're safe, but I can't take them with me. Not while there's a price on my head. Not while Carrington wants me hanged." "Then I propose solution," Catherine said, and Caleb heard the strategy forming in her mind even as she spoke. "Shared custody. James remains their father by blood, but Caleb and I become their legal guardians. We raise them, protect them, teach them both worlds. James can visit when safe, can be part of their lives. But day to day, they stay with us." "With him?" Thornton looked at Caleb for the first time, really looked, saw the mountain man holding his son, saw the way little Eagle was content in those rough hands. "Who are you?" "Nobody important," Caleb said. "Just the man who found them freezing on a mountain. The man who's kept them alive since." Thornton's eyes narrowed, assessing. Then, surprisingly, he nodded. "I've been told about you. Marshal Pike told me there was a mountain man traveling with my children, said you were decent, said you'd die before you let harm come to them." "That's true," Caleb confirmed. "Then I accept," Thornton said. "I accept shared custody, because I love my children enough to know they need more than a fugitive father can give. They need stability, safety, and if you can provide that, then you're a better man than most." The relief on Catherine's face was visible. She'd been prepared to fight for this, to argue and negotiate. Having Thornton agree so readily meant the hardest part was already done. But Grandfather Chayton raised his hand, calling attention back to him. "This is wise solution, but for it to have power, must be sealed properly, must be witnessed by both peoples, must be ceremony that whites and Apache both recognize as binding." "What kind of ceremony?" Caleb asked. "Adoption ceremony," Chayton said. "Old tradition. You and Thunder Walker's daughter become parents to these children in eyes of Apache law. Thornton gives blessing as blood father. Council witnesses. Then papers made for white law also. Catherine turned to Caleb. This means formal commitment. Not just traveling together. Not just temporary alliance. You become their father in all ways that matter. Are you ready for that? Caleb looked at the babies, at little Eagle in his arms, at Morning Dove sleeping against Catherine's chest. Thought about Emma and Jacob, about the family he'd lost. Thought about 5 years of running from that loss, trying to forget, trying to become stone. But stone didn't grow. Stone didn't heal. Stone just sat and weathered until it cracked and crumbled. These babies had taught him how to be something other than stone, had reminded him that the cracks in a person were where the light got in. "Yes," he said, "I'm ready." The ceremony was set for the following evening. It would take time to prepare, to gather witnesses, to make sure everything was done properly. In the meantime, they were given a wickiup to stay in, fed proper food for the first time in weeks, allowed to rest. That afternoon, while the babies napped, Caleb found himself sitting with Thornton outside the wickiup. Two men who should have been enemies, brought together by children neither of them had planned to share. "Tell me about Liluye," Caleb said, "about how you met." Thornton's face softened at his dead wife's name. She was translating during peace negotiations. I was fresh out of West Point, full of ideals about bridging cultures, making peace. Most officers saw her as just an Indian. I saw her as brilliant. She spoke 4 languages, understood law better than half the lawyers in the territory. We started talking after the negotiations ended. Kept talking. Fell in love without meaning to. Your commanding officer disapproved. Colonel Carrington saw it as fraternizing with the enemy. But we married anyway. Had 3 good months before the twins came. 3 months of being happy despite everything. Then Taza found us. And Liluye died protecting our children. Died because her own brother couldn't accept that love transcends race. "I'm sorry," Caleb said, "for your loss." "And I'm sorry for yours," Thornton replied. "Catherine told me about your wife and son, about what brought you to the mountain. We're both men who lost everything. Difference is, you're getting a second chance. Take it. Don't waste it the way I wasted my time in the army, following orders I knew were wrong." That evening, women from the village came to help prepare Catherine for the ceremony. They brought traditional clothing, jewelry, the things that would mark her not just as a warrior, but as a mother. Desba, the stern elder, supervised everything with the precision of a general organizing troops. Caleb was also given ceremonial clothing, a shirt made of soft deerskin, decorated with beadwork that told stories he couldn't read but could feel. An elder explained that the symbols represented protection, family, the joining of 2 paths into one. As the sun set, casting the village in gold and shadow, the community gathered. Not just Mescalero Apache, but representatives from other bands who'd arrived somehow, word traveling in the mysterious ways of the desert. White faces, too, a few. Marshal Pike had come, wanting to witness this. A Mexican priest from a nearby mission. Even Sarah Whitmore from Silver City, the store owner who'd protected them. A community, gathering to witness and legitimize what was happening. Grandfather Chayton stood at the center, with Caleb and Catherine on either side. Thornton stood as witness, holding both twins. The babies were awake, alert, seeming to understand in their infant way that something important was happening. Chayton began the ceremony in Apache, his voice carrying in the still evening air. He spoke of family, of duty, of the sacred responsibility of raising children. He spoke of the old prophecy and the new hope. He spoke of two peoples learning to walk together. Then he switched to English, so everyone could understand. Caleb McAllister, Nulnish, called Catherine, Thunderwalker's daughter. You come before this council, before these witnesses, to accept responsibility for two children not born to you, but chosen by you. This is sacred bond. This is permanent commitment. Do you accept? I accept, Caleb said, his voice stronger than he expected. I accept, Catherine echoed. Then by power given to me by Apache tradition, by witness of this community, you are now parents to Little Eagle and Mourning Dove. You will teach them both ways, white ways and Apache ways. You will show them how to walk between worlds without losing themselves. This is your oath. This is your duty. This is your honor. Chayton took Little Eagle from Thornton and placed the baby in Caleb's arms, took Mourning Dove and placed her in Catherine's arms. These children are yours, not by blood, by choice, which is stronger bond. Blood comes from accident of birth. Choice comes from heart. Heart does not break. Heart endures. Something happened in that moment. Something Caleb felt but couldn't explain. As he held Little Eagle, as the baby looked up at him with those dark, trusting eyes, he felt the last of his stone heart crack completely open. Felt 5 years of grief and guilt and isolation flow out like poison from a wound. Felt something new flow in to replace it. Love. Not the desperate, clinging love he'd felt for Jacob, the love tinged with fear of loss, but something steadier, stronger, the kind of love that said, I will protect you, I will guide you, and even if I fail, even if the worst happens, I will not regret having tried. Beside him, Catherine was crying, silent tears running down her warrior's face. She who never showed weakness, never showed vulnerability, was crying in front of her entire community, and nobody thought less of her for it. If anything, the witnessing crowd seemed moved by her tears. Thornton stepped forward one last time, placed his hands on both babies' heads in blessing. I release my claim, he said formally, not because I don't love you, because I love you enough to know you need more than I can give. Grow strong, grow wise, and when you're old enough, know that your blood father loved you enough to let you go. The ceremony concluded with gifts. The community brought blankets, food, small carved toys for the babies. Each gift represented acceptance, recognition that these children were now part of the tribe. But the most meaningful gift came from Desba. She approached Caleb, this stern woman who had lived through wars and losses he could barely imagine, and placed something in his hand. A small leather pouch. Inside, 2 braided cords of hair, one black, one lighter brown. First lock of hair from each baby, Desba said. Cut when they were born. Liluye gave this to me before she left with her husband. Asked me to keep it safe until the children came home. Now they are home. Now they have new parents. So you keep it. Remember where they came from. Teach them their beginning. Caleb's throat was too tight to speak. He just nodded, closing his hand around the pouch. That night, after the ceremonies ended and the community dispersed, Caleb and Catherine sat outside their wickiup with the sleeping twins between them. The desert sky was filled with stars so bright they seemed close enough to touch. We're parents now, Catherine said softly. Did you ever imagine that would happen? No, Caleb admitted. After Jacob died, I thought that part of my life was over. Thought I'd proven I couldn't keep children safe. But maybe I was wrong. Maybe the lesson wasn't that I failed. Maybe it was that I needed to try again. Needed to learn that sometimes you get second chances, even when you don't deserve them. "You deserve this," Catherine said. "You've earned it." "So have you. You kept them alive for 6 months alone. That's more than most people could do." They sat in comfortable silence for a while. Then Catherine spoke again, her voice tentative in a way Caleb had never heard before. "This partnership, this arrangement, it's for the children. But I find myself wondering if maybe it could be something more." Caleb looked at her, at this fierce, beautiful, complicated woman who'd become the center of his world without him quite noticing when it happened. "Something more," he repeated. "Like what?" "Like maybe we stop pretending this is just about the babies. Like maybe we admit that somewhere between that first day and now, we became more than allies. More than friends, even." "I'm not an easy man, Catherine. I'm broken in ways that don't heal. I've got ghosts that don't leave. I'll never be the husband Thornton was to your sister. I'll never be educated or refined or understand all the complicated feelings people are supposed to have." "Good," Catherine said, "because I'm not looking for easy. I'm not looking for refined. I'm looking for someone who shows up, someone who stays, someone who keeps his promises even when it's hard. And from what I've seen, that's exactly who you are." Caleb reached out, taking her hand, her fingers interlaced with his, calloused, matching calloused, strength meeting strength. "Then yes," he said, "something more. If you'll have me." "I'll have you," Catherine said. "All of you. Ghosts and broken parts and everything." Inside the wickiup, Mourning Dove made a small sound in her sleep. Both adults turned to check on her, the instinct already ingrained. She settled back into peaceful dreams, and they relaxed. "Tomorrow," Catherine said, "Carrington will hear about the ceremony. He'll know we're here." "Let him come," Caleb replied. "We've got legal standing now. We've got community support. We've got each other. That's more than we had when we started." "Is it enough?" "It'll have to be," Caleb said, "because I'm done running. This is where we make our stand. For them. For us. For the idea that love is stronger than law, that family is stronger than hate, that broken people can build something beautiful if they're willing to try." Catherine squeezed his hand. "Then we try, together." The stars wheeled overhead. The desert breathed its ancient patience. And two people who'd been running from their pasts finally stopped, finally turned to face whatever came next, together. Colonel Marcus Carrington arrived at the Mescalero Reservation 3 days after the adoption ceremony. He brought 40 soldiers, 2 federal marshals, and a determination that bordered on obsession. But he also brought something else, something none of them had expected: doubt. Caleb saw it in the way Carrington sat his horse at the reservation boundary, saw it in the pause before giving orders, saw it in the way the colonel's eyes kept moving to the locket he wore on a chain, the one that held a picture of his dead son. The reservation had prepared for this moment, not with weapons, though warriors stood ready, but with witnesses. Grandfather Chayton had sent runners to every band within 100 miles. Apache from 5 different tribes had gathered. Mexican families from nearby settlements. White homesteaders who'd traded fairly with the Mescalero for years. Even a newspaper reporter from Santa Fe, summoned by Marshal Pike, who understood that what happened here would echo far beyond this dusty patch of desert. The stage was set not for a battle, but for a reckoning. Caleb stood with Catherine in front of the council house, the twins in their arms. They'd dressed in a mixture of their two worlds, Caleb in his mountain man leather, but with Apache beadwork Catherine had added. Catherine in traditional dress, but with the rifle Caleb had taught her to shoot, slung across her back. Two people, two cultures, one family. Carrington dismounted with military precision and walked forward. Behind him, his soldiers fanned out in formation, but Marshal Pike positioned himself deliberately between the army and the Apache warriors, a human barrier saying violence would have to go through him first. "Miss Nullnish," Carrington said, his voice tight with controlled anger. "Mr. McAllister, I have federal warrants for your arrest. Conspiracy to harbor a military fugitive, unlawful custody of minor children, interference with federal law enforcement." "You have papers," Grandfather Chayton said, stepping forward. His blind eyes seemed to see more than sighted ones. "We also have papers. Legal adoption, witnessed by two peoples, filed with territorial court, recognized by tribal authority." "Tribal authority has no standing in federal court," Carrington shot back. "Then we go to federal court," Catherine said calmly. "We go to judges. We go to newspapers. We tell the world that United States Army tried to seize two babies from their legal guardians. We tell them about your plans to massacre peaceful Apache villages, about your illegal orders that Captain Thornton had to kill an officer to prevent. Shall we do that, Colonel?" Carrington's face went white. "Those are slanderous accusations." "With witnesses," Catherine continued, "with signed testimony from soldiers who were there, with evidence that's already been sent to the War Department and 3 major newspapers. Your choice, Colonel. Arrest us and face public scrutiny, or accept that these children are legally placed and beyond your authority." It was a gamble, a massive gamble built on bluff and misdirection. The testimony existed. Thornton had confirmed that. But whether it would actually reach the right people, whether anyone would care, that was uncertain. But Carrington didn't know that. He saw the crowd, saw the reporter taking notes, saw Marshal Pike standing with the Apache instead of with the Army, saw his career teetering on the edge of scandal. "This isn't about law," Carrington said quietly. "This is about order, about preventing chaos, about keeping white civilization safe from savage incursion." "From babies?" Caleb spoke for the first time, his voice cutting through the colonel's rhetoric. "You're afraid of 2 6-month-old babies? That's what this is really about?" Carrington's mask cracked. Just for a moment, but everyone saw it, saw the pain beneath the rigid military bearing. "I'm afraid of what they represent," Carrington said, and his voice shook. "I'm afraid of a world where the lines blur, where we don't know who's enemy and who's friend, where children grow up belonging to both sides and therefore threatening both." "Or healing both," Grandfather Chayton said softly. "Fear creates what it fears. You fear these children will destroy order, so you try to destroy them. But destruction only breeds more destruction. When does it end, soldier? When have you killed enough children to feel safe?" The words landed like arrows. Carrington stepped back as if physically struck. "My son," he whispered. "My William. He was 6 when the Comanche took him. I searched for 2 years. Found him finally, living with a Kiowa family. He didn't recognize, didn't speak English anymore. Looked at me like I was the enemy." The crowd was silent. Even the babies seemed to sense the moment's importance, staying quiet in their parents' arms. I tried to bring him home, Carrington continued, and now he was talking to himself as much as anyone else. Told him I was his father, that he belonged with me, with his people. He ran. I chased. And in the chaos, in the shooting, my own soldiers killed him thinking he was just another Indian child. My boy. Killed by friendly fire because nobody could tell friend from enemy anymore. Tears ran down the colonel's weathered face. Decades of grief and rage and guilt pouring out in front of strangers and enemies alike. That's why I fight, he said. Why I enforce the boundaries. Why I keep the worlds separate. Because when they mix, children die. My child died. I won't let it happen again. Catherine's voice, when she spoke, was gentle. Not the warrior's voice, but something softer. Your child died because people drew lines and enforced them with violence. These children live because someone refused to enforce those lines. Because a white man saved Apache babies. Because an Apache woman accepted help from someone outside her tribe. Because people chose love over law. Love, Carrington repeated bitterly. Love doesn't protect. Love doesn't establish order. Love is what gets children killed. No, Caleb said. Fear is what gets children killed. I've seen it, at Sand Creek, at a dozen other places. Fear makes monsters of good men, makes them do things they can't take back, makes them spend the rest of their lives trying to justify the unjustifiable. He stepped forward, still holding Little Eagle, walked right up to Carrington, close enough that the colonel could see the baby's face clearly, see the birthmark shaped like an eagle, see the innocent eyes that knew nothing of politics or prejudice. This is who you're afraid of, Caleb said. 6 months old, can't walk yet, can't talk yet, doesn't know what race means or why it should matter. You look at him and see threat. I look at him and see possibility. Which of us is right? Which of us is building the world we want to live in? Carrington looked at the baby, really looked, and something in his rigid posture began to crumble. I'm tired, he said quietly. So tired of fighting, of being afraid, of watching children suffer because of decisions adults made. But I don't know how to stop. Don't know how to do anything else. Then start by walking away, Marshal Pike said, stepping forward. Colonel, I've got authority here. Federal marshal trumps military and civil matters. These people have legal custody. They've broken no laws. You've got no grounds for arrest, so you can walk away. Go back to Fort Apache, file your report, and maybe, just maybe, start figuring out how to live with something other than fear. For a long moment, nobody moved. The desert held its breath. Then Carrington's hand moved slowly to his sidearm. Soldiers tensed. Warriors gripped their weapons. But Carrington just unbuckled his gun belt, let it fall to the ground. The sound of it hitting the dirt seemed impossibly loud. I'm resigning my commission, he said, effective immediately. I'm done. Done enforcing laws I don't believe in. Done building a world I'm not sure should exist. Someone else can carry this burden. I've carried it long enough. He looked one more time at the twins, at Caleb, at Catherine, at the gathered crowd of two peoples learning to stand together. I hope you're right, he said. I hope these children grow up to build something better than what we've made, because God knows we've made a mess of it. Then he turned and walked to his horse, mounted up, rode away without another word, his soldiers following in confused formation. Marshal Pike watched him go, then turned to the crowd. Well, Pike said, that was unexpected. but effective. Colonel Carrington's resignation removes military authority from this situation. The federal warrants he brought are invalidated. As territorial marshal, I'm declaring this matter resolved. These children are legally placed. Anyone who wants to challenge that can take it up with a federal judge. But I'm betting no judge wants to touch a case this politically complicated. Cheers erupted from the crowd. Apache voices mixing with Spanish and English in a sound that spoke of relief and celebration and something like hope. But the day wasn't finished delivering surprises. From the crowd, a figure emerged. Taza, Catherine's brother, the man who'd killed their sister and tried to kill the twins. He walked slowly, hands visible and empty, his scarred face unreadable. Catherine went rigid. Caleb shifted Little Eagle to one arm, his other hand moving toward his knife. But Taza stopped 10 feet away and dropped to his knees. When he spoke, it was in Apache, formal and ritualistic. Catherine translated in a whisper for Caleb's benefit. I come before council, before my sister, before the spirits of our ancestors. I have shed innocent blood. I have broken the bonds of family. I have brought shame to our mother's memory. I ask not forgiveness, only the chance to begin making amends that will take lifetime to complete. He looked up at Catherine, and Caleb saw tears on the warrior's face. Sister, I cannot undo what I did, cannot bring Liluye back, but I can honor her by honoring her children. If you allow, if they allow, when they are old enough to understand. Catherine stood very still. Caleb could feel the tension in her, the war between grief and compassion, between justice and mercy. Brother, she said finally, you took from me the sister I loved. You took from these children the mother they deserved. That debt can never be fully paid. But I also know that vengeance only creates more suffering. That forgiveness is not about forgetting, but about refusing to let the past destroy the future. She paused, looking down at Mourning Dove in her arms. I cannot forgive you today. Maybe not tomorrow. Maybe not for years. But I can say this. If you truly wish to honor Liluye's memory, if you truly wish to make amends, then live differently. Teach other warriors that purity is not strength, that mixing is not pollution, that children of two worlds are not threats, but bridges. Do that, and perhaps one day, when these children are grown, they will know you not as the man who killed their mother, but as the uncle who learned from his mistakes. Taza bowed his head, rose slowly, looked at the twins one last time with something in his eyes that might have been the beginning of understanding. Then he walked away, not toward the Apache warriors, but alone, toward the desert, to begin whatever journey of redemption he'd chosen. Grandfather Chayton spoke to the assembled crowd. Today we witnessed something rare. We witnessed power surrendering to conscience. We witnessed grief transforming into wisdom. We witnessed two peoples standing together to protect two children. This is how the prophecy begins to fulfill, not with magic, not with miracles, with choices, with courage, with ordinary people doing extraordinary things because they believe the world can be better. The celebration that followed lasted into the night. Food was shared. Stories were told. The twins were passed from hand to hand, blessed by elders from multiple tribes, welcomed into a community that had decided they belonged. Caleb found himself sitting with Captain Thornton as the stars came out. The younger man looked more at peace than he had since arriving. "Thank you," Thornton said, "for giving them what I couldn't, for being the father I wanted to be, but circumstances wouldn't allow." "You're still their father," Caleb replied. "Blood matters. They'll want to know about you, about their mother, about where they came from. Then I'll visit when I can, tell them stories. Be uncle more than father, perhaps. But be present in their lives." Thornton paused. "Pike says he can probably get my desertion charges reduced. Might serve 2 years, maybe less, given the circumstances. When I get out, I'd like to settle near here, if that's acceptable." "More than acceptable," Caleb said. "These kids, they're going to have questions we can't answer. Questions about being caught between worlds. You've lived that. You can help." They shook hands, 2 men who'd been rivals becoming allies, becoming family in the complicated way families are built when blood isn't the only bond that matters. Catherine found Caleb later, after the twins were finally asleep in the wickiup they now called home. She sat beside him, and they watched the fire burn down to embers. "I can't believe it's over," she said. "I've been running for so long. Being still feels strange." "It's not over," Caleb said. "Just beginning. Now comes the hard part, actually raising them, teaching them to walk in both worlds, figuring out how to be parents when neither of us had any practice." "Are you scared?" "Terrified," Caleb admitted, "but less scared than I was, because I'm not doing it alone. We're partners now, in every way that matters." Catherine leaned her head on his shoulder. "I need to tell you something I've been afraid to say. I love you, not just as ally, not just as partner, but as man, as the person I want to spend my life with." Caleb felt his throat tighten with emotion. "I love you too. Don't quite understand how it happened. We spent most of our time arguing or running or fighting. But somewhere in all that, you became the most important person in my world. You and those 2 babies sleeping in there. So what do we do now?" "Now we live," Caleb said. "We build something, not perfect, not easy, but good. We raise these children to be strong and kind and wise. We show them that the world, for all its ugliness, still has beauty worth protecting. And maybe, if we're very lucky, we prove that love is stronger than hate, that family is stronger than law, that broken people can heal each other if they're willing to try." 6 months passed. The reservation grew and changed. Caleb built a larger cabin at the edge of the settlement, incorporating both white and Apache building techniques, a place that belonged to both worlds. Catherine taught reading and writing to Apache children, while also instructing them in traditional skills, knowledge flowing both directions. The twins grew strong. Little Eagle took his first steps on a spring morning, walking toward Caleb with that determined baby focus. Morning Dove spoke her first words in a mixture of Apache and English, her mismatched eyes bright with intelligence. Thornton served his abbreviated sentence and returned to the area, building a small house nearby. He visited weekly, telling the twins stories about their mother, teaching them to honor where they came from while embracing where they were going. Carrington was seen occasionally in Santa Fe, working with a missionary organization that tried to reform Indian policy from within. He never visited the reservation, but he sent money annually for the children's education. Guilt money, perhaps, but also maybe the beginning of his own redemption. Taza traveled the territory, speaking to Apache bands about the need to adapt without losing themselves, about the possibility of coexistence. His words didn't always find welcome ears, but he kept speaking, kept trying. The work of a lifetime, as he'd said. And on a warm evening in November, Caleb and Catherine stood outside their cabin, watching the twins play in the dust. Little Eagle building elaborate structures with rocks. Mourning Dove knocking them down with gleeful determination. The eternal dance of creation and destruction that children excel at. "You know what I realized today?" Catherine said. "I realized I'm happy. Actually, genuinely happy. Haven't felt that way since I was a child myself." "Me too," Caleb said. "Thought I'd used up my ration of happiness when Emma and Jacob died. Thought that was it for me. But these two, they showed me you can always start over. Can always build something new from the ashes of what burned down." As the sun set, painting the New Mexico sky in shades of gold and crimson, Caleb found himself thinking about that first morning on the mountain. About finding two babies who should have been dead. About the impossible journey that had brought them here. Someone once told him that the mountains don't forgive mistakes. But they'd been wrong. The mountains don't forgive, true. But they do offer second chances. They take broken things and give them time to heal. They shelter the lost until they find their way home. He looked at his family, at Catherine, the fierce warrior who'd learned to let her guard down, at Little Eagle and Mourning Dove, growing up knowing they belonged to both worlds and neither, at the community that had gathered around them, proof that people of different cultures could build something together when they tried. And he knew, with the certainty that comes from experience hard-won, that this was what redemption looked like. Not grand gestures or dramatic moments, just the quiet accumulation of days well lived, of promises kept, of love given freely and returned in the laughter of children who would grow up knowing they were wanted, protected, cherished. The prophecy had spoken of children who would bridge two worlds. But maybe the real bridge wasn't the children at all. Maybe it was the people who chose to stand together, who chose to build instead of destroy, who chose hope over fear, love over hate, mercy over vengeance. Maybe the bridge was always meant to be us, Caleb thought. All of us, making the daily choice to be better than our fears, to be worthy of the children we're raising, to build a world they deserve to inherit. Inside the cabin, a baby cried. Mourning Dove, probably, who never did anything quietly. Catherine smiled, that rare, warm smile that still surprised Caleb with its beauty. "Your turn," she said. "Our turn," Caleb corrected, taking her hand. And together they walked inside, toward the sound of their daughter's voice, toward the life they'd built from nothing, toward the future that waited with open arms. The mountains stood eternal in the distance, sharp and unforgiving as ever. But in the valley between those peaks, human hearts had learned to be softer, had learned that strength sometimes meant yielding, that protection sometimes meant letting go, that love, in the end, was the only law that mattered. And two babies, sleeping peacefully now, dreamed dreams of a world where they could walk in two cultures without choosing between them, where they could honor their mother's Apache blood and their father's white heritage, where they could simply be themselves, loved and whole. The storm that had brought them had passed, but the promise it delivered, the promise of family and redemption and hope, that promise remained. That promise would endure.